When a woman chooses to live alone, the world often misinterprets that decision as a form of failure, something to pity, to fix, or even to mock. But the truth is far deeper, far more threatening to the narrative society has long depended on. Living alone, for a woman, is not an absence of love, it's a declaration of peace. And that declaration, though silent, echoes with power. Because what she's really saying is this: I would rather be whole alone than broken with someone. We've been conditioned to believe that companionship is the highest form of success for a woman. From fairy tales to films, the underlying message has been clear. Your value culminates when someone chooses you. But this idea collapses under its own weight when a woman finally realizes that being chosen by another does not mean being valued. In fact, many women have been chosen only to be used, diminished, or silenced. So, what does it say about a woman who steps away from that game entirely? It says she has chosen herself. And choosing yourself isn't easy. It means facing silence without flinching. It means looking in the mirror without distraction, without anyone's validation to comfort you, and asking, who am I? Really, that process is not romantic. It's raw. It's lonely at first, but it is necessary, because when a woman begins to ask that question, not as a daughter, not as a wife, not as a girlfriend, but simply as a human being, she uncovers something society fears: sovereignty. She becomes psychologically autonomous. Now, most people can't bear psychological independence. It disrupts control structures. A woman who no longer needs the approval of others becomes difficult to manipulate. She doesn't tolerate the nonsense she used to. She no longer engages in relationships out of desperation or a need to fill some emotional void. Instead, she cultivates peace within herself. And peace is a threat to systems that thrive on chaos. So, living alone, really living alone, isn't about physical solitude. It's about choosing not to compromise your peace for company. It's about walking away when your soul knows it can't thrive in a room full of people who only see you for what you can provide, not for who you are. It's about not needing noise to feel alive. Ironically, the woman who lives alone is more connected than most. She hears things others drown out: her intuition, her boundaries, her dreams. In solitude, these things grow louder, more vivid, more urgent. She doesn't need someone to tell her what's right for her anymore. She knows. And that knowledge becomes armor. It also becomes clarity. Clarity that she doesn't want to beg for respect. Clarity that love without dignity isn't love at all. And clarity that her time, energy, and body are sacred spaces, not communal property. That kind of clarity costs. It often costs relationships, approval, and acceptance. But it yields something far greater in inner stability. And that stability attracts higher standards. People who want access to her life must now offer something deeper. Something rooted in mutual respect, not control. She no longer entertains people who see her strength as a challenge to break. She no longer folds herself in half to be understood. And here's the paradox: the woman who lives alone has often loved the deepest. She knows what it means to give without limits. But when she realized that her empathy was being weaponized against her, she stopped offering it to the unworthy. She learned the difference between being kind and being exploited. That moment, when she stops betraying herself just to keep someone else comfortable, is the moment she rises. She doesn't hate men. She doesn't fear intimacy, but she won't sacrifice herself for it. She'd rather eat alone than sit at a table where respect isn't served. She'd rather walk her path alone than get lost in someone else's chaos. That choice makes her dangerous, not to good people, but to the systems and individuals who benefited from her silence. So when you see a woman living alone, don't assume she's lost. Realize she has found something most never do: the ability to be at home with herself. She may have once cried over people who didn't see her worth, But now she walks past those echoes like a woman who knows she is enough. The woman who lives alone didn't settle, she rose. And that, more than anything, is worth emulating. Because the world doesn't need more women waiting to be chosen. It needs more women who have chosen themselves and built something unshakable from that choice. Independence is often misunderstood, especially when expressed by a woman. In a society deeply embedded with narratives that tie a woman's worth to her relationships, particularly romantic ones, female independence can be perceived not as strength, but as rebellion, arrogance, or worse, failure. But the woman who chooses to live alone is not declaring war on love, nor is she issuing a statement of superiority. She is making peace with herself, and that peace becomes the foundation for everything else in her life. One of the most transformative truths a woman can confront is this: I do not need to be completed. I already am. This realization, while simple on the surface, requires a dismantling of decades of psychological conditioning. She must unlearn the belief that her happiness is someone else's responsibility. She must unlearn the idea that solitude is shameful. And most of all, she must unlearn the expectation that fulfillment arrives only when another person validates her experience. What replaces these illusions is something far more sustainable: self-trust. And that is no small achievement. Self-trust is not narcissism. It's not isolationism. It's the mature recognition that I can hold my own emotional weight. I can sit in my own silence and not fear what it will reveal. This doesn't mean she's invulnerable to longing or immune to love. On the contrary, it means she understands that any connection worth having must be a complement, not a crutch. To cultivate that kind of autonomy, a woman must confront discomfort. She must stop numbing herself with distractions or relationships that merely fill space. She learns how to cook for one, to laugh alone, to build routines that are not designed to impress anyone, but to nourish her soul. And in doing so, she begins to develop clarity about who she is and what she wants. Not in a vague, self-help sense, but with precision, with conviction. She knows now what peace feels like, and will not exchange it for chaos masquerading as love. That kind of woman is not only rare, she's threatening. Not because she harms others, but because her presence disrupts the lies people tell themselves. When a woman no longer chases, no longer compromises her dignity to be liked, those who relied on her submission begin to panic. They label her difficult, cold, or too much. But what she really is, what they truly fear, is someone who no longer needs their validation to breathe. In a world that profits from your insecurity, being self-contained is an act of rebellion. And for a woman, that rebellion is revolutionary. She no longer fears being misunderstood. She's not out to convince anyone of her worth anymore. The years she spent over explaining herself, shrinking to fit into someone's limited idea of womanhood, that's over. Now, she walks differently, not arrogantly, but with the calm assurance of someone who has nothing to prove. Her solitude is no longer a punishment. It's a sanctuary. And here lies the paradox: the more deeply a woman embraces her independence, the more she invites the right kind of relationships. Not ones built on need, but on mutual respect. Not ones rooted in dependency, but in shared purpose. Because she has become selective. Her energy is no longer up for grabs. Her time is no longer wasted trying to decode mixed signals or survive emotional manipulation. She sees through those games now and opts out, not because she's bitter, but because she's free. This isn't about glorifying loneliness. It's about reframing solitude as sacred. When a woman reaches the point where she doesn't fear being alone, she becomes impossible to control. Because the main weapon society has used to manipulate her, the fear of being unloved, no longer works. She has redefined love. She has placed herself at the center of her own life, not in a selfish way, but in a grounded, wise, and deeply spiritual way. She is no longer looking to be rescued. She is building. She is healing. She is living. And the man, or the friend, the community, the partner, who enters her life now must be strong enough to meet her there. Not to complete her, but to walk beside her, as an equal, as a witness, not a captor. And so we arrive at this truthing: the woman who learns to stand alone is the woman who can finally choose love freely, without fear, without need, and without compromise. Because her worth was never up for negotiation. She just needed time and silence to remember it. And once she remembered, the world could no longer unmake her.